Uh, what's up, y'all? Um, this is gonna be a little bit of a different type of episode. So, my grandfather passed today, and for anybody that really knows me, they know my grandfather was probably um, the biggest influence as far as a man in my life because, as I kind of already addressed, my dad wasn't the greatest father. So, my grandfather was not my dad's biological father, but he raised my dad. I've heard different stories about the man that my grandfather was when he was young, and that he wasn't. He treated my dad different, and this is what I heard from you know my dad, my mom, and I never saw that version of my grandfather. I never really saw anything negative about my grandfather, with the exception of him kind of being a little bit stubborn. Some people think he was aggressive. Um, I didn't feel that way because I understood my grandfather. So when I moved in with my grandparents, my first memory, I stayed in the basement, so I came upstairs. And when you come on my grandparents' stairs, it opens up from the basement into the kitchen. Make a left, you go towards the front door, go to the right, it's into the kitchen. So hit the steps, come up. My grandfather was in the kitchen. I started going toward the door, and my grandfather stopped me. He's like, "Boy, I ain't sleep with you." And I didn't know what he was talking about, but basically he broke it down to me. When you see somebody for the first time in a day, speak to them. And I didn't have a lot of, I guess, moments like that with my grandfather. It's like he said what he had to say. He just kind of, let me know what it was. And then I did what he told me to do. And it was pretty straightforward. I know I mentioned on a previous episode that most of my interaction when I lived with my grandparents was with my grandfather. And my grandmom took care of, shopping and stuff like that. But as far as parenting, it was really my grandfather. So I think he's probably more responsible for me being the man that I am than anybody else. So why is that? Like I said, I heard stories about my grandfather and his shortcomings or flaws or things that he did wrong when he was young from other people, from my dad, from my mom, from my grandma. When me and my grandma did really develop a relationship, it was primarily around when she got a bit older, and she couldn't walk with her friends anymore in the group that she used to walk with. I used to get up in the morning. Even though I didn't live with my grandparents, I stayed close enough, stayed about 10 minutes from my grandparents. So I would get up at like 5 o'clock in the morning every day and go take my grandmom to go walking. So she didn't have to go walk by herself, and she felt safe because she told me that she didn't feel comfortable walking by herself because when she tried, it was times where, men would stop and offer her rides, and she just felt uncomfortable. So I'll go walk with my grandma. And that's where she told me a lot about her relationship with my grandfather. And really not too much detail, just kind of how that he didn't do what he was supposed to at certain points when they was younger. And how that changed the dynamics in their relationships. My grandma would cook dinner every day, hold down the household. My grandfather might stay out drinking with his friends, running the streets, whatever, wouldn't come home one time. And my grandfather even shared with me, he was like, because when I was with my grandparents, my grandfather did the majority of the cooking. So he told me one day, like, he was pretty much responsible for cooking because when my grandma used to cook, in his words, he ain't bring his ass home. So he messed it up. And that was one thing about my grandfather and my dad. Like, those were two of the people that even if they messed up, like they kind of took their lumps. So stories that I heard just about him running the streets, um, drinking, partying, getting caught with other women. He told me one time he was driving down the street with another woman in the car and he drove past my grandma. And like my grandfather was just so kind of laid back with like telling me whatever he did. So he was like, shit, I drove past your grandma and hell, I knew I was caught. So I just pulled over. Like, so it was stuff like that. I remember one time when I was in high school, my grandfather went out of town to visit a friend. So I didn't really know all of the history with my grandparents. But as I started learning it obviously when you hear negative stuff about people, you take it in consideration. But when I looked at the person my grandfather was, it was inspiring to me because to see this man and responsible, consistent, compassionate, caring, because in their later years, my grandma didn't have to really worry about anything because my grandpa didn't play about my grandma. Like it was the priority to make sure my grandma had what she wanted and got to do what she wanted to do. So seeing that and then hearing about how that wasn't always the case, it really kind of shined a light for me as to how much people can change. And if people are given the opportunity to change, then how they can essentially become a completely different person. So that was my view of my grandfather. I remember when I first moved in with my grandparents, one of the first stories my grandma told me, because when I was young, my grandparents stayed in Cahokia. And I remember that house. It was toward the end of the street on the left. It was like one of the last. It wasn't the last house, but it was a small, modest house. 2 bedroom. You walk in the house. My grandma and grandfather room was to the immediate right. It was the living room, and then the boys' room was past the living room to the left, opened up into their room. If you went to the end of the living room to the right, it opened into kind of a day room. And I guess that's where my Aunt Joyce used to sleep. And then that you went through there, went into the kitchen. It was a back door. If you went to the left, it was like the laundry room area. Then there was another bathroom in the back. So that's where I spent a lot of time when I was young. But then in high school, when I moved to my grandparents, they had a new house. So when I first moved in, I remember my grandma telling me that was her house. And my grandparents call each other Washington because they worked together when they were younger. So they used to call each other, refer to each other by last name. So I remember my grandma telling me, she was like, this is my house. I left Washington ass, but he wouldn't leave me alone. He followed me over here. So that was my introduction to kind of, my grandparents' history. My grandma didn't get too deep into it after that until I was an adult. But when I stayed with my grandparents, my grandfather was really the person kind of molding me until at least to give me the foundation to be the man that I am. So I just remember, the conversations where he was just really telling me I got to be accountable. I remember washing dishes one day and I don't know what I was doing. I think I was just like washing the dishes and then rinsing every dish as I was washing it. He told me I was working smart. I was working hard. I wasn't working smart. So he used to always tell me stuff like that, man. You got to work smart, not hard. So all of these little lessons and all these, they stuck with me. Like my grandfather would literally probably tell me stuff one time, but when he told me, it was an impact. So it was stuff that I always took with me. We probably only had 2 times where I felt my grandfather was wrong. And it was just because I was a kid that would listen. So I remember I got in trouble at school and was talking to both of my grandparents. So they were in their room. I was standing in the doorway, and I got in I won't even say a fight. I got attacked by this girl at my school because she called my mom a bitch, and I was like, "Well, you a bitch." So she scratched me up, and I didn't fight her because I was always taught don't fight girls. And so I'm standing here. I got suspended anyway. I got scratches on my face, scratches like on the back of my neck, on my back. Like she was just attacking me like a wild animal. So I'm standing here listening to my grandparents, and I was looking at the floor, and I had my head down. So my grandfather was telling me, when he talked to me, to look him in his eyes. So that's what I did going forward. So that's when I was in high school. Now fast forward a couple years, we were having a conversation about something else, and my grandfather was talking to me. So I'm looking at him in his face, and he got an attitude like say I was trying to stare him down. And that was the thing about my grandfather. He was gonna stay this position, and so he said whatever he had to say. But he will also, if you had a valid point, he would listen if you presented it the right way. So that was one of the times, he was wrong. And I told him like, man, you told me to look you in your eyes when you talking to me. And then now you talking to me and I'm looking in your eyes and you want to say, I'm trying to stare you down. It was little simple stuff like that stood out because I try to take his guidance and instruction as much as possible. Obviously, as a kid, I told the line, as they say. I didn't always do the right thing, but I try to do the right thing based off what my grandfather taught me. So that was one time I felt like he was wrong because it's like, I'm doing exactly what you told me to do. And then like you challenged me about something you told me to do because I'm looking in your eyes. Now you mad at me talking about I'm trying to stare you down. And then the other time I remember, it was like 2007, my grandfather bought a new Silverado. And we were both working at ASF Keystone. So my grandfather was a foreman out there as long as I can remember. So when I got old enough to go work at the steel foundry, I went to go work at the steel foundry. And we had some type of, the steel foundry had some type of affiliation or partnership with the car company. So we got a small discount, employee discount. So he got a Silverado. And when I went to go buy my first vehicle, I went and got the same exact, well, I won't say the same exact Silverado, but the same model year. But the way my bank account was set up, I couldn't afford to get all the bells and whistles like my grandfather. So his truck was nicer than mine, but I went and got this truck. So I was reading the manual. So it said I had to get a oil change every 5,000 miles. And then that's the only other time me and my grandfather really got into it because he was telling me I need to get my oil changed at 3,000 miles. I'm like, well, the books say 5,000 miles. So we went back and forth about that. But outside of that, I really never had even a disagreement with my grandfather. He taught me, or at least he put me on a path to become the spades player that I am. And in my opinion, I'm probably the best that I know. But it's because I played with my grandfather and my great uncles and all of them. And so when I would make mistakes, he would explain to me what I did wrong, why I did it wrong. And that would always resonate with me because it made sense. Like as long as something made sense, I'll roll with it. So with him passing today, is very challenging because I don't do well with processing loss or emotion. I think I condition myself to, I don't want to say be cold, but not be overly sensitive because I was in a situation, I felt like in my marriage where I had to essentially temper my emotions to not respond, to not get hurt, to not get angry, because if I didn't, I don't feel like I would have been able to survive in a household because I just felt like I didn't get any respect and it was toxic. So the secondary impact of that is when you kind of depress your emotions, then that sticks with you. So still to this day, it's a challenge for me to really process emotions because when the emotions that you have the most are of disappointment, frustration, disrespect, um, sadness, then you don't really want to feel anything. So now it's hard for me to feel anything. So when people die, I don't have a typical response. My grandfather, in my opinion, if I had to say one person was the most responsible for me being the person that I am, is my grandfather. And losing him today, I just know it's part of life. I know I won't be able to have the conversations I had with him anymore. I know I'm gonna miss him. I know he probably had a lot more knowledge that and wisdom that he wasn't able to share with me because we just didn't get around to having those conversations. But it inspires me even more and it creates even more resolve in me to continue doing what I'm doing. So when I am gone, that's not the case. My kids, my family, friends, anybody that cares to know my story or follow me, follow my journey, this will always be there. And that's something that does kind of sadden me that all of the knowledge, all of the experience that my grandfather had that he wasn't able to share, wasn't able to pass down to my dad, that my dad wasn't able to pass down to me, and me feeling even more of a responsibility to continue to do this so that when I'm gone, that's not the case. I will share every lesson that I learned. I will share every strategy that I come up with, every routine, because man, the benefit of what he shared with me and the foundation that he gave me to build on is really what's going to create a change in my family. The to see the example because I do have regrets. I do see a lot of parallels in all of the men in my family making stupid mistakes when we were young, potentially costing ourselves relationships. And I saw that in the end, my grandfather was able to change to become a person that deserved the respect, that displayed the compassion, the courtesy, the love, and everything for my grandma. So I saw that, and I saw the man that he became, and that inspired me. That you're not limited to being stuck, being whatever you are. You can always become a different person, and I'm in the process of trying to become a better person, for my family, my kids, my ex-wife, my siblings, like my friends, the people that rely on me at work. I just really want to be the best person that I can. And the number one example of that is my grandfather, because in his later years, he was that person. He was the person that everybody leaned on. He was the person that took care of everything for everybody, that made sure everybody was taken care of. That was the example of how to lead, and up until today, like even with everything that was going on with my grandfather, he battled with cancer for years. He still made his number one priority taking care of my grandma. So that type of commitment, that type of dedication, that type of love is really inspiring. And I'm so glad that despite the fact I didn't have the best father, I had a really great grandfather. And the opportunity to get what I got from my dad, but then to be able to get in a different environment and see the example of my grandfather and my grandparents in general, it was really beneficial for me. So it's a bittersweet day because the last time I saw my grandfather wasn't too long ago. I went to St. Louis for my kids' birthdays, and I got to sit with my grandfather, and he was in pain, and he been going through these challenges, and he was tired. So knowing that he's not suffering anymore, knowing that he kind of accepted the reality, and you know, I didn't get to see him again. I didn't get to speak to him again, but the last time we spoke, and just throughout my entire life, I had enough conversations with my grandfather, and he had enough influence on me that as long as I do what I'm supposed to, as long as I accomplish what I plan on accomplishing, as long as I become the man that I want to become, and I share these things with the people after me, my grandfather, and his legacy will always live on. I love you. I know I'm gonna always miss you, but I'm also always gonna carry on your legacy and build a life that I want to have and become the man that I want to become, and follow your footsteps in not being a prisoner of circumstance, being intentional about changing my life and becoming the best man I could be. And I owe you a lot, and hopefully I continue to make you proud. So, Grandpa, I love you. I miss you. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that your legacy is something that lives on. And that's a huge part of who I am. So, yeah, who is Clarence? Whoever Clarence is, a big part of the reason is George Washington. And I thank you for that.